The heavy rain poured across the long driveway as Claire stood outside the massive iron gates of the Hawthorne estate, one hand wrapped around her 7-month pregnant belly and the other clutching a small overnight bag that had been thrown onto the wet pavement only moments earlier. The mansion behind her glowed with warm lights, but none of that warmth reached her. Standing inside the doorway was her mother-in-law, Margaret, wearing an expensive silk dress and an expression colder than the storm outside. "You don't belong in this family," she said before ordering the guards to lock the gates. Claire tried to explain that she had nowhere to go and that Ethan, her husband, would be home the next morning after finishing negotiations overseas. Margaret simply smiled. "By the time my son returns, you'll already be gone." Claire slowly sat on the curb, exhausted and shivering, trying to protect her unborn child from the cold. What neither woman noticed was a black SUV parked across the street. Inside sat an elderly man quietly, watching everything unfold. He wasn't a stranger. He was someone whose arrival would change every secret hidden inside that mansion. Claire had never cared about wealth. She met Ethan years earlier when both volunteered at a community health center. She fell in love with the man who stayed late to help elderly patients, not the billionaire whose last name opened every door in the city. Ethan loved that about her. He married her despite knowing his mother would never approve. Margaret believed every marriage should strengthen the family's business empire, and Claire, a school teacher from an ordinary family, represented nothing but disappointment in her eyes. While Ethan spent months expanding the company overseas, Margaret slowly took control of everything inside the mansion. She dismissed Claire's opinions, replaced her personal doctor with one she trusted, and even instructed servants never to follow Claire's requests unless Margaret approved first. Claire kept every painful moment hidden because she didn't want Ethan distracted while handling the biggest deal of his career. She believed love meant protecting each other from unnecessary burdens. She had no idea that her silence was giving Margaret exactly what she wanted. The next morning, Ethan's flight landed hours earlier than expected. Excited to surprise Claire, he rushed home carrying a tiny stuffed elephant he had bought for their future baby. But when he entered the nursery, he found it empty. The crib had disappeared. The baby clothes were gone. Claire's paintings had been removed from the walls as if she had never existed. Confused, Ethan asked where his wife was. Margaret calmly replied that Claire had left during the night after admitting she wasn't ready to become part of such an important family. Something felt wrong. Claire would never leave without calling him. Before he could ask another question, the elderly man from the SUV walked through the front door. Every servant immediately recognized him and lowered their heads. It was Arthur Hawthorne, Ethan's grandfather and the true founder of the family's fortune. He had been living quietly abroad after retirement and had returned unexpectedly without informing anyone. Looking directly at Margaret, he asked a single question. "Would you like to tell your son what really happened, or shall I?" The silence inside the mansion became unbearable. Margaret insisted Arthur had misunderstood everything. She claimed Claire had become emotional because of pregnancy hormones and stormed out on her own. But Arthur calmly removed his phone and played security footage recorded from cameras installed near the estate entrance during a recent security upgrade that Margaret didn't even know existed. The video showed Margaret ordering guards to throw Claire's belongings outside before locking the gates, while Claire begged only for permission to call Ethan. Every lie collapsed within seconds. Ethan couldn't believe what he was watching. His wife hadn't abandoned him. She had been abandoned by the very person he trusted to protect her. Furious, he demanded to know where Claire was. The guards admitted they had secretly called an ambulance after finding her unconscious at a nearby bus stop shortly after dawn. Ethan raced to the hospital terrified. He had already lost everything. If you're enjoying stories filled with emotional betrayals, shocking twists, and unforgettable justice, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring you more original stories every single week. When Ethan arrived at the hospital, Claire was awake but emotionally broken. She smiled the moment she saw him, yet the sadness in her eyes hurt more than any words could describe. She apologized for becoming a problem, believing Margaret had convinced Ethan she was responsible for everything. Instead, Ethan fell to his knees beside her bed, holding her hands as tears filled his eyes. "I should have been here," he whispered. "I promised I'd always protect you and I failed." Claire gently placed his hand on her stomach where their baby kicked for the first time since the frightening night. In that tiny movement, Ethan realized he had nearly lost a family that mattered more than every business success combined. But he also knew apologies alone would never erase what had happened. Justice had to be served. Without telling Margaret, Ethan and Arthur quietly prepared their response. Days later, Margaret proudly hosted an extravagant charity gala attended by politicians, investors, and influential families. She expected Arthur to publicly announce that she would become chairwoman of the Hawthorne Foundation. Instead, Arthur stepped onto the stage holding a folder filled with documents. In front of hundreds of guests, he revealed that years earlier, he had rewritten his estate plan. Any family member found abusing their position or mistreating another relative would permanently lose every leadership role and inheritance privilege. Then he played the security footage on the enormous ballroom screen. The entire audience watched Margaret forcing her pregnant daughter-in-law into the rain. Gasps filled the room. Investors who once admired her quietly walked away. Board members removed her from every executive position before the evening ended. The reputation she had spent decades building disappeared in less than 10 minutes. For the first time in her life, money couldn't buy respect. Several months later, Claire gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Ethan sold the mansion that had become a symbol of fear and bought a smaller home overlooking a quiet lake, where laughter replaced arguments and peace replaced luxury. Arthur often visited to read bedtime stories to his great-grandson, reminding Ethan that true wealth was never measured by marble floors or expensive chandeliers, but by the people who felt safe under your roof. Margaret wrote countless letters asking for forgiveness, but Claire chose something stronger than revenge. She chose boundaries. She wished Margaret healing, but she refused to allow the same pain back into her child's life. And strangely enough, that decision became the greatest punishment of all. Margaret eventually realized she hadn't lost her status because of Claire. She had lost it because every cruel choice she made had slowly destroyed the very family she claimed to protect. In the end, it was never just about betrayal. It was about discovering who truly deserved a place in your life. Because real family isn't defined by blood, wealth, or a famous last name. It's defined by the people who stand beside you when you are at your weakest. And sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't making your enemies suffer. It's building a life so full of love, peace, and dignity that they can only watch from a distance. knowing they traded everything that truly mattered for nothing at all.